Good afternoon. It's Thursday, the 23rd of July. I'm Erin Viner, and this is IBA News broadcasting from Jerusalem. A 53-year-old Palestinian was shot and killed in another night of overnight violence. Falah Abu Maria was participating in a riot that erupted in Beit Umar, north of Hebron, and hit by retaliatory gunfire from an IDF Kfir brigade force as he joined others in pelting them with rocks. The incident occurred as the unit was withdrawing from a particularly confrontational arrest operation. After entering the residence of a wanted suspect, the troops encountered resistance, including the attempted choking of one of the soldiers. Abu Maria's death came less than 24 hours after the fatal shooting of a 21-year-old Palestinian in the West Bank village of Brooklyn during a similar riot that broke out amid another raid to apprehend wanted Palestinians. The Obama administration begins its effort to sell the Iranian nuclear deal to Congress later today, when the Senate Foreign Relations Committee will hear testimony from key officials. At the same time, Ambassador Ron Dermer is leading pushback to the agreement in hopes of persuading the House to reject it. Here with more is IBA's diplomatic correspondent, Ellie Wogelenter.
Secretary of State John Kerry will face increasingly heated criticism from his former Senate colleagues today when he appears before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee to persuade them of the efficacy of the Iranian nuclear agreement. Kerry will speak along with two other principals of the Obama administration tasked with crafting the deal, Energy Secretary Ernest Moniz and Treasury Secretary Jack Lew. Kerry is set to describe how the deal will prevent Iran from making progress on nuclear weapons. Moniz will discuss the positive impact on oil prices from a new source of oil for the world market, and Lew will talk about how the deal will impact the economy. The three will also testify next week before the House Foreign Affairs Committee. Kerry began his efforts to sell the deal in meetings yesterday with members of Congress. Kerry told reporters that the agreement is in the interest of the United States and its allies.
So we're very much looking forward to answering any and every question that the members of the House have, and then later the members of the Senate. We are convinced that the agreement that we have arrived at with world powers is an agreement that will prevent Iran from the potential of securing a nuclear weapon. It will make the region, our friends and allies, safer. It will make the world safer. And we are convinced that the absence of any viable alternative absolutely underscores that fact.
Republican lawmakers are generally opposed to the deal. After listening to the briefing from Kerry, Republican Senator and presidential candidate Lindsey Graham was scathing in his criticism.
So the construct that Secretary Kerry has in his mind, that there's a moderate hardline element and we need to empower the moderates, I think is a gross misunderstanding of Iran. And the idea that you have to take this deal or we'll have a war comes from a weak-minded president and a Secretary of State who wants a deal way too badly. At the end of the day, there is a better deal awaiting the world and the United States with a new president. This is the best deal Barack Obama could get because he's so weak in the eyes of our enemies and so unreliable in the eyes of our friends. So I hope a no vote will be seen as empowering the next president.
Whether Congress has enough votes to reject the deal is unclear. Should they vote it down, President Barack Obama has already promised to veto that rejection. It would then fall upon Congress to vote again against the proposal, but it would have to muster up a two-thirds majority vote, which most pundits believe would be very difficult. But Republican Senator Tom Cotton said he did not believe the administration had the numbers to overcome a no vote.
I think the vote count itself clearly indicates that there's not a 1/3 plus one minority to sustain a presidential veto yet. Perhaps they'll get there, but the longer this deal is reviewed by the American people and they learn details like Qasem Soleimani and the Quds Force and the Revolutionary Guard Corps getting sanctions relief, for the fact that it may take at least 24 days, if not weeks, to get access to disputed sites, I think the American people are going to weigh in and Congress is going to reflect their opinion and that we're going to kill this deal.
Democrats have largely remained silent on how they plan to vote, with the majority saying they plan on carefully reviewing the agreement over the coming weeks. Democratic Senator Dick Durbin said that Kerry had made a convincing case for the agreement's passage.
It's my belief that this agreement is in the best interest of the United States security and the security of the Middle East. It's an agreement which was carefully crafted with our allies at the table. It was brought Iran to the table facing sanctions which obviously had a dramatic impact on their economy. We need to seize this moment to make the Middle East safer and to make the world safer.
In the House of Representatives, many congressmen have also expressed their objection to the agreement. Among them, House Speaker John Boehner.
While the president's Iran deal may have been applauded at the United Nations, I think he faces serious skepticism here at home. Let me just assure you that members of Congress will ask much tougher questions this afternoon when we meet with the president's team. Because a bad deal threatens the security of the American people, and we're going to do everything possible to stop it.
Meanwhile, Israel's ambassador to the U.S., Ron Dermer, held meetings himself on Capitol Hill yesterday. Dermer has been the main point man and vocal in his criticism of the agreement and has publicly declared his intention to kill it using all tools at his disposal. Dermer explained some of his objections to Anderson Cooper of CNN.
There is no linkage in this deal between Iran's behavior and the removal of the constraints on their nuclear program. There's no linkage. 4 days ago, the president of Iran was in a rally where people were burning American and Israeli flags, chanting death to America and death to Israel. That wasn't 40 years ago. It wasn't 4 years ago. It was 4 days ago. So Iran has no incentive to change. And you've just made a terrorist regime much richer today, and you're going to allow them, after a decade, to have a huge enrichment infrastructure to make many nuclear bombs. This is a disaster.
And in New York, an estimated 10,000 people converged on Times Square for a protest rally to urge Congress to vote against the nuclear agreement. People came in buses and caravans from as far away as Charlotte, North Carolina, Chicago, Columbus, and Philadelphia. Dozens of Jewish and non-Jewish organizations were represented at the rally. New York Democratic Senator Chuck Schumer was one of the names most mentioned by some 24 speakers who were seeking to pressure the senior Jewish senator to vote to override the president's announced veto. Schumer has said he has not yet decided how he will vote. Speakers included Republican presidential candidate George Pataki, legendary Manhattan DA Robert Morgenthau, former CIA Director James Woolsey, Attorney Alan Dershowitz, and Congressman Trent Franks.
You know, ladies and gentlemen, I'm afraid that the Iranians have been watching Barack Obama for a very long time. And when he stood idly by and knowingly watched as thousands of innocent civilians in Iraq were either butchered, tortured, raped, beheaded, crucified, or burned alive, the Iranian leaders knew that they had nothing to fear from Barack Obama. So they came to the table with nothing and walked away with everything. And now, instead of making sure Iran never gets a nuclear weapons capability, Mr. Obama's politically motivated peace in our time deal empowers this and the most dangerous sponsor of terrorism on this earth, and now places them on a sure path, not just to obtain a nuclear weapon, but an entire nuclear arsenal.
In addition to Times Square, there are similar demonstrations in Fort Lauderdale, Phoenix, Los Angeles, and Toronto. Erin?
Thanks for that report. During each of his meetings with visiting leaders, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu continues to rail against the Iranian nuclear accord. Croatian President Kolinda Grabar-Kitarović told the premier that her country has Israel's back in the European Union.
I believe a better deal is still possible. And in any case, no agreement is better than this bad agreement. And I repeat, this agreement doesn't prevent war. It will make war, even nuclear war, more likely. Iran's president called the Security Council's adoption of this deal an historic event. Well, he's right. It's a historic mistake. A better deal that would tie the lifting of restrictions on Iran's nuclear program and would roll back Iran's nuclear infrastructure, such a deal would be tied to ending Iran's aggression and terrorism. That's the real alternative.
I truly wish you peace and security. With respect to Iran, we fully support the use of nuclear energy in for peaceful purposes. Of course, we have to be very vigilant and cautious. We need strong implementation and verification measures, and we will be monitoring that very closely. With respect to the Middle East peace process, we support the efforts of the international community to reach lasting peace and security in your region as well. We support the efforts of the international community for the continuation of the Israeli-Palestinian dialogue, a two-state solution where Israel has the right to peace and security, and we believe that Palestine has the right to state and the quality of life. And in the end, Mr. Prime Minister, let me reassure you that in Croatia and in me personally, you have a strong friend, ally, in the European Union and in NATO and in global relations as well.
That's much appreciated.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Boycotts of Israel are stupid. That's the view expressed by visiting Italian Prime Minister Matteo Renzi, who told the Knesset that the Palestinians must recognize the right of the Jewish people to statehood. Hailing the warm ties between Jerusalem and Rome, Renzi referred to his trip as a secular pilgrimage. People from around the world make pilgrimage to Jerusalem to pray for peace here, he said, adding that it's not enough to pray for peace and that we must also build peace. The Italian premier called for a two-state solution to the conflict with security for both sides. Renzi defended Israel, saying that it goes beyond a right to exist. You must exist and live for the future of your children and mine. He went on to call Israel a fulcrum of the world and vowed that his nation will stand with Israel in the global war against terrorism, barbarism, and violent extremism. Following a plea bargain agreement, the Jerusalem District Court has sentenced two Jewish brothers to prison for perpetrating an arson attack on an integrated Jewish-Arab school in the capital. 21-year-old Shlomo Twito will serve a 2-year term and 19-year-old Nachman Twito 2.5 years. The residents of the settlement of Beitar Illit were also ordered to pay compensation to the hand-in-hand school where 600 children attend class from kindergarten to high school. The culprits are members of the far-right Lehava group, which is opposed to any kind of assimilation. Both brothers were unremorseful, admitting to torching the facility, and while being led away from the sentencing, both smiled and chanted how good God is, and that the attack was worth the price. Security cameras captured the nighttime attack on November 29th last year, carried out by the brothers with 22-year-old Yitzhak Gabay, who is still on trial. All three have police records for nationalist activism. Firefighters called to the scene found graffiti reading "Death to Arabs," "Kahana was right," and "No coexistence with cancer" scrawled on the walls. The school's chairman, Nihad Rashid, called the verdict too lenient, but said that the steering committee would respect the court's decision. The head of the PTA, Hatem Matar, said that the school will continue to operate and expressed hope that the student body will become stronger by uniting against the negative incident. Prime Minister Netanyahu can now breathe a sigh of relief after he managed to secure the appointment of two of his preferred candidates to serve on the Judges Selection Committee. Due to a deal made with Israel Beitenu, both the coalition and opposition's representatives on the Judicial Selection Committee will be right-wing. Likud member of Knesset Nurit Koren and Israel Beitenu faction chairman Robert Ilatov were elected overnight in a hard-fought secret ballot held in the Knesset plenum. The two lawmakers beat out the opposition's candidates, MK Ofer Shelach of Yesh Atid and Ayelet Nachmias Verbin of the Zionist Union, who received 42 and 52 votes respectively. Both Netanyahu and Israel Beitenu head Avigdor Lieberman agreed to support each other's candidates 2 weeks ago in an effort to keep judicial nominations under control of the center-right. Early this morning, the Knesset voted to advance a bill presented by Justice Minister Ayelet Shaked that would enable a minister or deputy minister to leave the Knesset and return if and when they exit from the cabinet. The bill passed a preliminary reading by a 67 to 63 vote with the support of the coalition and Knesset members of the Israel Beitenu faction. There are still obstacles to overcome, but if the bill eventually becomes law, it would apply to parties with less than a dozen MKs, including Abait Yehudi, Shas, the United Torah Judaism, and Kulanu. The Tel Aviv prosecutor's office has relaunched an investigation into the case of Gal Beck, the 16-year-old cyclist who was killed in a traffic accident at a major intersection in the city 10 years ago. The decision follows a series of investigative reports aired on Israel Television Channel 1, indicating that the state prosecutor may have covered up critical evidence pertaining to the incident. Justice Minister Shaked announced the decision at a special session on the matter held by the Knesset last night. Beck was killed almost immediately after being hit by a female driver who may have run a red light and lied to police about the speed that she was driving. For years, his parents have insisted that the case was closed prematurely for unclear motives. The driver is the daughter of a prominent and wealthy businessman and was never prosecuted. Accounts from eyewitnesses presented on the Channel 1 report revealed major contradictions between the versions put forth by the driver and the witnesses. Prosecutors have already begun to collect new testimony. The summer is said to be the busiest in the history of Ben Gurion International Airport, and today is expected to be the most congested day of the season. More than 72,000 travelers came through the arrivals and departures gates on a total of 430 flights. Terminals 1 and 3 were both packed, and very brisk business is being reported at the duty-free shops. All told, we're likely to see more than 3.2 million passengers pass through the airport this summer, and the total is expected to reach or even top the current record that was set over the summer of 2013. The Tel Aviv Municipal Committee for Planning and Building has approved a grandiose plan to cover a major section of the city's Ayalon highway with a grass roof to transform the main traffic artery into an urban oasis. The project is estimated to cost 2 billion shekels and take several years to complete, and it's set to be brought for approval by the committee by the start of next year. The Ayalon Freeway is one of the country's most heavily traveled roads, with about 750,000 vehicles using it on a daily basis. The plan would build a park that would completely change the appearance of the central region's main business area by bridging the eastern and western sections of the highway to create an enormous environmentally green hub for cycling, hiking, and recreation, in addition to commercial activity. In financial developments, the European Union today strenuously denied reports that it would impose sanctions on Israeli banks that do business with settlements. A senior EU official rejected a report published by the European Council on Foreign Relations yesterday advocating such a move. The report sparked initial panic in the local market and a drop in the stocks of Israeli financial institutions. But the EU says that the Council's recommendations are non-binding and will not be adopted. The Council is calling for the imposition of restrictions on all Israeli banks that do business with settlers, including loans and mortgages. The shekel today lost strength against all major foreign currencies, and after a bit of a shaky start, share prices on the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange were up by this afternoon. Here's a look at the numbers. The IBA weather team tells us we're heading into a steamy weekend with another rise in temperatures to unseasonably high levels tomorrow, although there should be a little bit of relief from the heat wave by Sunday. Here's the forecast at home and abroad over the next 24 hours. Thank you for being with us this afternoon. We hope you'll join us again tomorrow, and I'll be back to bring you the latest breaking news from Israel. I'm Erin Viner, wishing you a great evening and shalom from Jerusalem.